in secondo grado? Testa.
Ok, allora sai anche il cognome.
Ok, Alice Bicone.
Alice Bicone, perfetto.
Il primo qua.
Io mi chiamo la Testa, sono speaker 2 e farò anche la lingua finale.
Scusa, non ho capito il cognome perché con la
Testa.
Testa, ok, perfetto.
Farò anche la lingua finale.
Sì, perfetto, grazie.
Io sono lo speaker 3, sono Sara Cicchino.
Grazie.
Giovanna De Marco, primo speaker.
Ok,
Fedele Giulia, secondo speaker.
Giulia Wiggett, terzo speaker, il cognome è W-I-2G e 2T.
perfetto.
E la deadline?
Fedele Giulia.
Ok, perfetto. Due note tecniche, vabbè, ovviamente sapete che gli interventi sono da 8 minuti, il primo e l'ultimo minuto sono bloccati, quindi non si potranno fare più AI. La reply invece è da 4 minuti. Quando parlate, se vi alzate potete togliere la mascherina, basta che poi quando vi sedete la rimettiate. Analogamente per i POI, vi potete alzare, fate il POI, se vi dicono ok, fammi pure la domanda, abbassate la mascherina, poi la potete rimettere. Adesso facciamo una prova, nel senso che vi faccio sentire la campanella, comunque vi invito a tenere il vostro timer sotto. Mi dite se fisicamente la sentite, se no vi batto sul banco, tra 5 secondi suona. Vediamo. Vediamo, ora. No, si sente, perfetto.
Se vuoi ce l'ho io, faccio io.
Ok, lo fa lei in ogni caso, no, facciamo così, batto io sul banco che siamo sicuri che si senta. No, batto io sul banco, non preoccuparti. Perfetto. Allora, se non ci sono domande di qualsiasi tipo, direi che possiamo iniziare ufficialmente, così facciamo l'intro e tutto. Ci siete? Perfetto. Sì, no, lo vedo io. Perfetto, allora, perfetto, possiamo dichiarare aperto questo dibattito. Oggi le due squadre si affronteranno sul topic This House Food Ban, the Consumption of Animal Meat, e a difendere la squadra pro si trova alla nostra sinistra, mentre la posizione difesa dalla squadra contro si trova alla nostra destra. Quindi, se senza altri indugi, do la parola alla prima speaker della squadra pro, Alice, quando vuoi.
Okay, so good morning everyone. I'm Alice. I'm the first speaker of the proposition team. Today, my fellow speakers Dora, Sarah, and I will firmly ban the consumption of animal meat from an economic, scientific, evolutionary, and social point of view. Our goal is to defend the motion and to explain the reasons why we should ban the consumption of animal meat. We will be discussing how meat, and more specifically industrial meat, is bad for the planet and has negative effects on our long-term health. We focus our attention on the current banned modes of production, trade, and consumption, as our second speaker will introduce later. But what about ethics? I will be arguing 2 points. Initially, we must consider the relationship between meat consumption, consumer attitudes towards animal and human welfare and moral behavior. Is it wrong in principle to raise and kill animals so that human beings can eat meat and fish? As many scientific studies have shown, animals do experience pain analogous to human and have feelings. The Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness in Non-Human Animals in July 2012 brought together the findings of top neuroscientists showing that animals are aware and conscious beings. An animal raised for food is being used by others rather than being respected for itself. In philosophers' terms, it is being treated as a mean to human ends and not as an end in itself. This is a clear violation of animals' rights. No matter how humanly an animal is treated in the process, raising and killing it for food remains morally wrong and cruel. In All Animals Are Equal, philosopher Peter Singer, a professor of bioethics at Princeton University and the author of The Ethics of What We Eat, argues that the interests of all being capable of suffering are worthy of equal consideration, and that giving lesser pigs consideration based on species.
Right.
Yes.
Some nutrients are absent in meat. What will you do then?
So Sorry?
Some nutrients are absent in meat.
Yes.
What do you do then?
Well, whereas in our, in our industrialized society, we can get plant-based supplements and alternatives such as protein, iron, act from vitamin supplements. As our next speaker also will introduce later, we believe that there's no absolutely need to kill animals and get these proteins from sources that have to be raised and killed. As I was saying, plus even the idea that it's the rational autonomy of humans that makes them superior doesn't work. In fact, infants, Alzheimer's patients and development disabled also may be considered lacking in rational autonomy. But this does not define the criterion for being treated as an object of moral consideration. Secondly, another crucial point that the industrial livestock farming is and how this catastrophically affects the environmental over time. Hypothetically considering that eating meat is morally correct, most meat, dairy and eggs are produced in ways that largely or completely ignore the animal welfare, failing to provide sufficient space to move around, contact with other animals, and access to the outdoors. Nowhere is this impact more apparent than climate change. It contributes 80% of human-produced greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. This is more than all emissions from ships, planes, trucks, cars, and all other transport put together. In short, industrial farming causes animals to suffer without good justification. Therefore, taking into account all these negative effects that consumption of meat causes to animals, but inevitably on ourselves, is it possible to lead a vegetarian lifestyle? Well, whereas in our society, in absolutely yes.
What about pesticides used to disinfect the plants?
Yes, from this point of view, the economic point of view, our second speaker will argue this later. Anyway, as I was saying, whereas in our society, we absolutely need to kill animals as it could be justified in previous centuries when finding food was harder and vitamin supplements weren't around, and considering that today it's done only for the pleasure of taste, the answer is yes. Fruits and vegetables are primary source of food. Animals' meat is secondary. We can get protein, iron, act from different sources that don't include something having to be raised and killed. In fact, those who eat meat frequently may get more protein than they need. In fact, in our industrialized society, protein deficiency is rare. Protein needs for an average person may surprise you. For example, a 150-pound woman will need only about 50 grams of protein per day. Or for example, plant-based bean stock in at around 7 grams of proteins. Millions of healthy vegans and vegetarians are the world over approve of this. So everything considering that, as it states also by the most world and government health organization, it's possible to live perfectly and healthily on a plant-based diet, we believe that abolition of meat can only bring benefits. Thank you.
Perfetto, grazie. Allora, per gli altri giudici il tempo di discorso è durato 5 minuti e 32 secondi. Vi chiediamo ancora un attimo per sistemare gli appunti. Perfetto, allora possiamo ringraziare la prima speaker della Preparation Site e possiamo dare, quando è pronta, la parola alla prima speaker della squadra dell'opposition. Quando vuoi.
Grazie. Man is what he eats. Feuerback. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad to be here today with my team to discuss this topic. But first, let me start by introducing myself and my house. We have the Girls' Voices team that includes me, Joanna De Marco as the first speaker, Giulia Fedele as the second, and Julie Wiggett as the third. and Julia Restas, the fourth member of the team. We are the opposition team, and we support the idea that it is wrong to ban the consumption of animal meat, and for some reasons that we are going to discuss today. First, let me start by giving a proper definition that you haven't given, because you say that to ban something means to state officially that it must not be shown or used, so it is something that has to be prohibited. Furthermore, our team believes that this term is a bit too extreme, because we are convinced that one should say what we have to eat or not to eat. And we want to remind you that the word meat comes from the Old English meta, which means food. So the etymological origins of the term confirms the fact that meat is something to be eaten by humans. And furthermore, the term consumption is the action of using up a resource, and meat is a fundamental resource of humans' diet. My house believes that your idea of completely cutting out meat from our diet is too drastic and eventually dangerous for one's health. This is why we strongly want to maintain the status quo, and for this we are going to demonstrate that eating meat is not so bad, and that meat foodies must rest assured. I need to remind everybody that archaeological studies and university researches showed that Stone Age humans were apex predators. They were carnivorous, then they became omnivorous. What I'm trying to say is that to devote vegetarians is that their ancestors were not vegetarians, but on the contrary, the consumption of meat is part of an evolutionary history of mankind. But I think that it's better not to confuse personal beliefs with scientific reality. Our suggestion to reconcile the
So you talked about an evolutionary process concerning meat, for example. But in light of the current events, and so with the progressive diffusion of veganism and vegetarianism and the global impact of meat, don't you think that our evolutionary process will then shift to a more plant-based nutritional plan, since it's not a necessity anymore for us?
No, because it is necessary. For example, meat is full of B12 vitamin that is only in meat, and for example about environment is less dangerous than plant-based environment. And our team will discuss about all of the 2 points. Well, our suggestion to reconcile the 2 facets of the same issue, to eat or not to eat meat, is to encourage what is nowadays the so-called flexitarianism. The flexitarian diet is essentially a flexible alternative to being a vegetarian. So you are still focusing on fruits, veggies, nuts, but you can also enjoy steaks, burgers, or sausages too. Because after all, man is omnivorous, and so he has to feed on both animal and vegetable substances. So this house wants to show that there are at least 3 arguments in favor of eating animal meat. This is why our team is against the claim. And firstly, because it is part of a balanced diet. Secondly, because meat is far from being unsustainable. And thirdly, because there's nothing cruel and unethical about eating meat. I'll start to discuss the first point, because my first argument in favor of meat consumption is to explain that if we completely remove meat from our diet, the effects on our body would be nefarious, because meat contains proteins, vitamins, and other nutrients that aren't in vegetables. Protein creates Protein creates strong bones, cartilage, and skin and blood. And although you can get protein from different food groups, the main provider of protein is still meat. Meat is full of zinc that creates anticorps that allow our body to fight disease and infections, protecting us from diseases. The iron in meat products and protein helps to improve oxygen delivery to many parts of the body, like tissues and cells. And selenium is another important mineral that is contained in it, and it is helpful to maintain a healthy metabolism. Meat also provides your body with calcium, vitamin D, and vitamin B12, omega-3 fats. These are nutrients only found in animal protein. Vitamin B12 is necessary, and we have to ensure to our body at least 2.4 micrograms a day. Vitamin D also is necessary for the brain evolution in children, and you can argue that you can get the same amount of nutrients that from eating vegetables, but it's not like this. So eliminating meat from our diet will remove also a lot of good nutrients. I want, in fact, to show that just because a meat substitute is vegan doesn't mean it's the healthiest option, because supermarkets are full of fake, generally vegetables that contains higher average of salt and chemicals that are dangerous for our body. Secondly, studies confirms that just abstaining from meat doesn't guarantee you a healthy diet. And vegans who consume no animal products and vegetarians who consume some animal products because natural food sources of vitamin B12 is limited. And furthermore, generally a vegetarian or a vegan diet has to be supplemented with vitamins. And low iron levels can lead to a condition called anemia that is dangerous for us. Beef and lamb are also the two highest source of zinc. And all the facts of this supports that we believe that meat is essential, irreplaceable, and preferable to plant-based products, because meat contains essential nutrients such as also vitamin D3 that is only contained in meat. Another important aspect is that vegetarians or vegans are more exposed to anxiety and depression, and it is shown by scientific studies. For example, about the 2012. And vegetarians were more depressed, and the research is recent. It might not have to do with low vitamin B12 levels, which has been linked to depression and can happen when you are not eating meat. So, I like to. So on the other hand, plant-based diets are high in fiber, antioxidants, and for all these reasons, my team suggests a sort of compromise between the meat consumers and supporters of vegetarianism or veganism, the so-called flexitarianism, which is a very balanced diet of meat products and plant-based foods. You should definitely eat meat, but with an accompaniment of vegetables. Also because the World Health Organization recommends everyone should have at least 5 portions of a variety of fruits, vegetables, and meat every day. So, thank you for taking the time.
Perfetto, grazie mille. 7 minuti e 59 secondi. Allora possiamo ringraziare la prima speaker della squadra pro, possiamo dare la parola alla prima speaker della squadra contro, possiamo dare la parola alla seconda speaker della squadra pro, quando vuoi. Se ti alzi ti chiederei di togliere la mascherina così ti sentiamo meglio.
Okay, so I'm ready. Hello everyone. First of all, I am Laura Testa, the second speaker, being part of the proposition team regarding the motion we're given today, so the ban related to meat consumption in general. First of all, I would like to say that our House does not agree with the proposition of actually involving a balanced diet in terms of meat consumption, since the concrete circumstances in which we live cannot allow that. First of all, I would like to say that this is not something that must not be shown or prohibited, because saying it like that would actually suggest that we are actually imposing something to people without actually considering things. But in my speech, I will involve all of these aspects in my speech. In fact, I will talk about the agricultural, the economic, and also the social aspects, bad aspects of eating meat. In particular, the fact that the irresponsible and inconsiderate use we make of this kind of resource has become the sixth point of the OECD FAO Agricultural Outlook from 2021 to 2030 makes us understand the kind of damage we're in and the kind of danger we're in. Growth in global consumption of meat is destined to increase by 14%, both driven by growth in the population and income. And this could be, of course, considered as something, as a further economic opportunity for those who actually support the current approach towards meat industry. But our house is here in order to highlight the series of deficiencies which we can actually focus on. I'm going to present the first one by further widening the environmental as well as the agricultural question, which was already well introduced by my fellow speaker Alice. More than 80% of farmland is invested on livestock, and but it only produces just 18% of food and 37% of meat proteins globally. So we have to consider the fact that actually investing on meat costs us a higher percentage of aggressively exploited land. And this...
Eli,
Yes?
if meat is banned by law, what happened to everyone who work in these industries?
Okay, I thought about it. It's actually a very good question. But the fact is that each country and each state is prone to a certain type of agriculture. For example, we have Scotland, which is one of the most relevant states which produces meat. But it's also a very productive in actually producing wheat or even grain. So I think that the local economy, the global economy in general, would be actually enriched by banning meat, because of course everyone has its own typical things. And yes, so I hope this answered your question. So the whole concept of the damage perpetrated by meat production was further widened by Professor Joseph Poor, which also made a difference between the various types of actually producing meat. For example, beef cattle raised on exploited land results in 12 times more greenhouse gases and 50 times more land than those following rich natural pastures. And moreover, even the lowest impact beef would be responsible for 6 times more greenhouse gases than actually producing plant-based products. And for what you asked Alice previously, a variety of agricultural procedures which are sustainable are currently diffusing in the world. For example, we have agroforestry, which is a kind of technique that actually allows people to grow plants in a sustainable way. Or in England, people are currently introducing, instead of pesticides, natural predators that could actually eat and consume the bacteria that often infects plants. The possibility of choosing a plant-based diet would not only benefit our agriculture and our environment, but also our economic and health aspects. And as also said by Professor Marco Springman, if people continue to follow the current nutritional path, it could cost the US between $197 and $289 billion per year. And plus, I wanted to actually say something about the health aspect you previously talked about with the meat. Saying that meat and legumes have very similar percentage of zinc, and plus you have not considered the actual health damage perpetrated by meat, because consuming a red type of meat and even the standard percentage of it could actually... Yes?
So if we remove meat completely, we are going to remove an important part of our economy, because that is an industry. So how is the agricultural diet going to benefit our economy?
Yes, as I said before, we have to consider the fact that yes, nowadays we can consider meat as something important, but healthily, because as I said, 80% of our agricultural areas are invested on livestock, but it only produces 18% of food, whereas the same amount of area could produce much more plant-based products, and this would of course benefit the economy. I hope this answer your question. So, yes, as I was saying before, consuming a standard amount of meat, which is 100 or 150 grams a day, could increase the risk of cardiovascular diseases from 20 to 20%. And plus, this study was deepened by the researchers being part of the proceeding, the PNAS, the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which also calculated the actual costs that we would save from banning meat through two kinds of approaches. We have the PNAS and the value of statistical life, so the VSL. And the savings coming from a change in terms of a nutritional plan would be $735 billion per year. So I would like to clarify that the instances we provided today within our house go beyond the mere belief that we have. And as also stated by FAO, our habits and our life standards will slowly mold after our necessities. And the environmental impact we have today forces us to shift to a plant-based diet. So this is the only way we can actually try to change our future and make it better. Thank you for your attention, and yes, I'm finished.
Grazie a te. Il tempo è stato di 7 minuti e 26 secondi. Perfetto, allora possiamo ringraziare la seconda speaker della squadra pro e dare la parola alla seconda speaker della squadra contro.
Good morning everybody, I'm Giulia Videre, the second speaker of the opposition team. The second speaker mentioned greenhouse gases that are very dangerous for the environment. And I'd like to say that the hypothesis of producing and consuming meat being dangerous for the environment is partially true. For example, between those greenhouse gases, there's also methane that is produced by ruminants that consume also a lot of it. But it only remains in the atmosphere for a short period of time. And this leads some to argue that cattle that produce methane are actually neutral for the climate because they do not make the situation worse. On the other hand, being vegan or vegetarian isn't always the best solution because it also often depends on people's personal choices. The main issue with agricultural production is the use of herbicides and pesticides, such as ammonia, hydrogen sulfate, glyphosate, and so on. They are indispensable for agricultural production to control weeds, insect infestation, but also diseases. About 1/3 of the agricultural products are produced using those pesticides, and without them there would be a 78% loss of food production.
Excuse me, no. So aren't also toxic pesticides used to produce and grow plants to feed animals from animals?
Yes, but if we do not use them, animals would die. They need those kind of vegetables to eat to stay alive, so it's not.
I meant pesticides to grow this food.
Yes, but they are still used because if the animal cannot eat that kind of food, then it will die. As I was saying, there will be 54% loss of vegetable production and 32% loss of cereal production. So they play a crucial but also critical role in reducing diseases and increasing crop yields worldwide. The problem is that they are dangerous not only for the environment, but especially for a person's health. In fact, they are stored into our colon when there is lowly poison in our body. Maybe we do not realize it, but when we are eating a non-organic fruit or vegetables, we are also eating over 30 different types of pesticides that store in our body and will slowly poison us. Even if we wash them, some of them will still be lingering on its surface or can sit in it. Pesticides have also been linked to cancer, Alzheimer, and birth defects. They can be harmful for a nervous system, a reproductive system, and endocrine system. They can be dangerous even for fetuses because they can pass from the mother during pregnancy, or if a woman nurses a child, it would be dangerous for him. So even though one piece of fruit won't actually kill us, if they build up in our body, they can be detrimental for our health. Another aspect to consider is that many horticultural production is grown in greenhouses. Greenhouse vegetables produce dangerous pollutions such as sulfur dioxide, ethylene, and oxide of nitrogen, which are strong environmental polluters but are also dangerous for the crop and indirectly for the consumer. Ironically, ethylene is a growth hormone naturally produced by plants during their growth and development, and it is considered as the ripening hormone since it is responsible for the ripening of the fruit. For example, when tomatoes are destined to long trips, they are picked when they're still green and then they're sprayed with ethylene, and this allows them to soften and to turn red. To all this, there's also to add the impact of packaging, that's mostly plastic, and transportation that are very dangerous for the environment if we do not buy local products. Food is traded mostly internationally, and this makes exotic fruits and vegetables available at our tables at any season, but at the expense of the environment, because this increases greenhouse emissions. As concerns the unethical issue, we are inclined to believe that there are many differences between animals and humans. Many people believe that animals should have the right to life. Excuse me, pure eye. No, thank you. To life, to be free, and that the well-being of humans should not be put above the well-being of animals. We do not agree with this because there's a great difference that is a cognitive difference, because humans are endowed with a conscience, but also they can reason. Even Aristotle, the most influential of all thinkers, believed that the main difference between animals and humans was the fact that humans can reason. This difference is not a quantitative difference that regards intelligence, but especially a qualitative difference, because as I already said, humans are endowed with a consciousness, and they are capable of emotions, feelings, compassion, and empathy. We also have a capacity to be happy or sad that goes beyond any experience that an animal can have. The only exception is for pets and dogs that have developed special abilities to communicate with us, and we do not eat their meat. That demonstrates that human suffering counts more than suffering that any animal could feel. I would like to say that this is not an argument to support any form of cruelty against animals, but I only want to prove that humans are superior to animals. So they are allowed to keep using them as they please. After all, humans have been hunting and killing animals since prehistoric times. For example, they incorporated meat in their diet about 2.5 million of years ago, and some scientists also argue that meat is what makes us humans. I would also like to say that anthropologists have found out that in the past, when the human diet consisted only on seeds, fruits and vegetables, they spended a lot more energy for digestion, and this made it difficult for the brain to develop because a lot of energy was spent for digestion. But as soon as they started incorporating meat in the diet, all this changed because there was less time needed for digestion, and so that energy was used for the brain that started to grow explosively inside. As for the way animals are treated, I would also like to say that European legislation is trying to change this. There are some regulations that explain that animals should be killed in a humane way. The best recommended method is stunning, that is killing the animal while it's unconscious, so you won't feel pain or distress. And then as for the cruelty of farming methods, I would like to say that nowadays people pay great attention to what they buy, and so they are more inclined to buy animal food, meat, that is produced in organic fields, that contains healthy amounts of vitamin A, D, and E. Our solution is not to completely remove meat from our diet, but to go flexitarian, so to incorporate meat, lean cuts of meat with veggies, because we can get healthy amounts of nutrients, vitamins, proteins that can be good for our health. That was all. Thank you for listening.
Perfetto, grazie mille. Il tempo è stato di 7 minuti e 58 secondi. Perfetto. Allora ringraziamo la seconda speaker della squadra contro e possiamo dare la parola alla terza speaker della squadra pro per l'ultimo intervento costruttivo della squadra. Quando vuoi, ti chiedo di tirare giù la mascherina così ti sentiamo bene.
So, hello, I'm Sarah and I'm the third speaker of the opposition team. So I'd like to partake in some aspects presented by my previous speaker. Laura discussing them from a more environmental and scientific point of view, but first I'd like to respond to the second speaker of the other team, since regarding the theme of the idea that humans are superior to other animals. Like also my previous speaker Alice has explained, so we believe that we are like other living beings, with the only difference that humans do not have to struggle for survival anymore, like other animals who need to kill other living beings in order to survive. So we are free to choose our own diet, but I'll talk about this topic later in my speech. So first, I'd like to say that the vast majority of meat consumed worldwide today is being produced in intensive factory farms, which are part of a system, an enormous system controlled by big supermarkets, multinational companies, and this system has also produces or requires a huge amount of land, like also Laura said, to sustain itself. In fact, every year thousands of forests are destroyed in order to gain land to grow crops for these animals. Our house, so we firmly believe that meat must be banned in order to preserve our health, our environment, and in order to assure that our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren will be able to fulfill their needs living in harmony with nature in a new world. So now I'd like to present why this ban can and should be approved. So number one, like we said, it's one of the main causes of deforestation. So many farmers decide burn down forests in order to gain new lands to grow crops for farm animals. You may have seen the news concerning the Amazon rainforest fires, for example. That is also one of the main causes of climate change, since as previously mentioned, industrial meat has an enormous impact, climate impact. Roughly the same of all the driving and flying of cars, trucks, and planes. So when forests are destroyed, thousands of tons of carbon dioxide are released into the atmosphere, and this also increases, so accelerates this process of global warming. Many don't know that industrial meat is also responsible for human abuses and also for human rights abuses on land grabbing. So many indigenous populations fight against land grabbing in order to protect forests. And they are even abducted, shot, killed for their actions in favor of nature. And even President Bolsonaro tacitly encourages land grabbing. And we can also say that we can define that phenomenon as a modern-day slavery. And another important point is that industrial meat is also killing wildlife by using also toxic pesticides to grow animal food. So, as I also asked your team before concerning the use of pesticides to grow animal food, I'd like to emphasize that it's not necessary to use pesticides to feed animals, because these same pesticides could be dangerous for our health, like also the use of antibiotics. Also to assure that animals are healthy, but that's not necessary if they live in and have enough space to move and to grow. So another important point regards the risks of future pandemics like those of COVID, since by destroying habitats we brought wildlife closer in contact with humans. So viruses like coronavirus can easily pass from one species to another, from animals to humans. And so the more forest is destroyed, the greater the risk of a future pandemic like coronavirus. And finally, like also my previous speaker Laura has explained, it's an inefficient way of eating. An efficient way to eat if we consider that over a quarter of the world's land area is used to produce crops to feed animals, while the same amount of land, the same area, could be easily used to produce directly food which could be directly eaten by humans, instead of giving them to animals that then are killed and then we also eat their meat. So another question regards so many vegetarians and vegans spread that idea that our bodies were never meant to eat meat. We disagree with this idea, since there are many scientific evidences that prove that our body. Yes.
So without pesticides, many products would be ruined and the industry wouldn't work because consumers are very selective. What would happen then?
Well, we believe that there are many alternative, more organic and biological alternatives to pesticides. Even, for example, there are many plants that also OGMs, for example, are an alternative which isn't dangerous for our humans, since if they don't contain any dangerous substances. But they naturally adapt to the changing conditions and also to insects and other problems that could be when growing crops. So, as I was saying, from a biological point of view, it's true, we are omnivores, we can eat both meat and plants. But like I said before, we do not have to struggle for survival anymore, so we are free to choose our diet. And in this moment, in this precise moment, with the climate change and the other environmental changes, we have to take action now, because it will be too late. It will be too late to change the situation later. So this, and from a nutritional point of view, obviously this could we would have many benefits also for our health, since obviously an excessive consumption of meat could causes different diseases concerning, for example, heart diseases, as well as high blood pressure, cancer. And as iron, the content of it's true that meat-based iron is easily absorbed by our bodies, but there are many tips that could help us to absorb also plant-based iron. For example, by also consuming vitamin C, or by well cooking legumes and grains, which reduces also the content of zinc and iron inhibitors. So, in conclusion, we firmly believe that meat should be banned. Thank you.
Grazie Sara, il tuo discorso è durato 8 minuti e 2 secondi. Allora ringraziamo la terza speaker della squadra pro, possiamo dare la parola alla terza speaker della squadra contro per l'ultimo intervento costruttivo di questo dibattito. Quando vuoi.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julia Wiggett, and I will be acting as the third speaker for the opposition team. So, of course, we have listened to both sides of the argument, both of which have been very enlightening. So I feel pretty confident in putting both of them together to finally reach to a constructive conclusion for both sides. So you stated that meat is dangerous. Well, of course, if you eat too much meat, that is not in any way going to be healthy for you. Instead, what we must do is not ban meat, but of course, eat meat with measure and reconcile it with a plant-based diet. Of course, plant-based diets, just like you said, are very healthy and contain a lot of vitamins which are very important for our body. So meat and plant-based foods must work together. Meat is not necessarily dangerous. For example, meat contains a very important vitamin, which is vitamin B12. This vitamin we cannot find in any other food unless we eat meat. So, a plant-based diet requires planning. For this reason, we cannot just wake up in the morning and decide to go meat-free. We need to consult with a doctor or a nutritionist to understand what are the best options for us. And meat is a very healthy food to eat because of vitamin B12. For example, in the past few years, we have lived with a very dangerous pandemic, which was the pandemic of COVID-19. Well, meat, with its vitamins and its many proteins that gives, of course, people who eat it, can help boost our immune system. So, of course, meat plays an essential part in our health. But, of course, if we eat too much of it, we are going to go through all the consequences that you have stated, and you are correct in stating those. One of the risks of not eating meat is the possibility that a fetus, for example, may be born with scary diseases like anemia. And for example, when people complain of tiredness, like or even arthrosis, well, meat plays a part in this too. But of course, we cannot just discuss of physical matters. We must also talk of mental matters. Well, meat plays an important part here as well because it boosts dopamine, and dopamine is known as the happiness hormone. For example, a lot of people who suffer depression, one of the first things that a doctor asks to cure his disease is, what do you eat? Well, meat plays an important part here as well because of dopamine, of endorphins. Well, I want to make you another example of why meat is so essential. Well, let's go back in history. So let's talk about Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens. Well, they were born as omnivores. They used to eat meat, they used to hunt it, and that's how they started to reproduce themselves. This is how humanity was born, through meat. And only later, man understood that along with meat, also he could start to eat plants and fruits and other vegetables. So meat must play along plant-based foods. Second, you said something about that meat is unsustainable. You talked about deforestation. Well, of course, I'm not going to be the one to say that the meat industry is not polluting. I'm not going to imply that. But are you seriously going to compare the pollution of the meat industry with the pollution of the carbon fossils or the oil produced? Yes.
No, so many studies show that the ancestors of many animals were carnivores, but many of those animals then evolved to become herbivores. Can this be possible also for humans?
Yes, of course this can be possible, and in fact there are actually a lot of people who refuse completely to eat meat. But of course they are missing some very important vitamins and nutrients. Of course, eating animals is no longer a struggle, but we need, of course, to look after our health and take precautions and eat good food. For example, we have seen this with the pandemic, how important all of this is. I hope this answers your question. So, what I was saying earlier is that, are you seriously going to compare the pollution of the meat industry with the pollution produced to bring electricity into our homes or running water? And of course, we are not going to actually complain about electricity or water because we need it. Well, don't we need meat as well? So, another point that I would like to talk about is the pesticides used in the chemical industry that are obviously going to be used for the plant-based industries. And of course, a lot of them are used in vegan foods on the market. And of course, that is not going to be unhealthy because we are still going to eat all those pesticides. But of course, they do play an important part. But we must take into account when you say that meat is not necessarily healthy. What about eating plant-based? How healthy is that really? Well, you also said about something that is unethical and cruel. Well, what about a wolf that eats a lamb? Are we going to blame the wolf? No, because the wolf is only doing what he's only eating the lamb to protect himself, and no one is going to blame him for it. So yes, eating meat is very ethical. And I hope I have given you something to think about, and even considering that the European Court has very at heart the ethical part of the meat industry. So thank you for your attention. My speech is over.
Grazie a te. Il tuo discorso è durato 8 minuti e 22 secondi.
Can I have a little bit of time in order to recollect things?
Potresti? No. Sei? Ok, perfetto, allora possiamo ringraziare la terza speaker della squadra Colp. Adesso passiamo a quella che è la fase riassuntiva del dibattito. Ricordiamo che durante le reply non si potranno porre quelli che sono i point of information e diamo la parola alla replyer della squadra contro. Quando vuoi.
Hello everybody, again. This amazing time has come to an end, and I must admit that this has been a very lively and fun debate. Although we have realized that after this debate there are some points of clash between the pro-team and opposition team. First of all, the first point of clash concerns the POI that I made to the first speaker. She said that we can use that we can use some types of fruits and vegetables that provide us with nutrients, iron, and so on that can help us to stay healthy. But there's something that the first speaker of the opposition team has explained, and it's the fact that vitamin B12 is only present in meat, and so we cannot think about deleting it completely because it is a fundamental vitamin that is used in many metabolic reactions that allows our cells to work efficiently and correctly, so to stay healthy. Of course, we should eat vegetables and fruits because they contain some nutrients that maybe meat doesn't contain, but that doesn't mean that we should completely remove meat for our diet. Instead, choose for something more conciliant, that is a flexitarian diet. As for the second point of clash, it concerns the economic aspect. The second speaker has mentioned natural pesticides, but I have to remind you that thousands of meat industry, depend on the production of traditional pesticides. And they could not live without them because they use the money that they earn to feed themselves and their families. So again, I'd like to suggest you a more conciliating and gradual solution, because we cannot think about banning something all of a sudden, because there would be great problems, not just for our health, but especially for our society and for economy. That is a very complex system. And then as for the third point of clash, it has to do with what the third speaker said, and it was of OGMs. When you answered to a question, you said that we can use OGMs, but if we modify plants genetically, those particular species that we are removing will go completely extinct. And so when we start to produce OGMs massively, the original ones won't be bought anymore, and so there will be, again, problems for people and for society, for the economy. And then what about the preservation of species? We believe that by supporting OGMs, we are deleting a fundamental part of evolution that helped humans throughout the centuries, not just what concerns the economic aspect, but also our health. Finally, from this debate emerged 2 points of view. The pro team has proposed a drastical solution that sees meat as the origin of all wars of the world. The other one is ours, that is an optimistic vision, because we believe that meat is not as bad as you presented it. Meat and plant-based food provide essential substances that allow our body to grow and stay healthy, and that's why we support the flexitarian movement. So that's why we believe that we should keep eating meat with veggies. That was all, thank you.
Grazie Giulia. I tuoi discorsi duravano 4 minuti e 8 secondi. Perfetto, possiamo dare la parola a Laura affinché faccia l'ultimo discorso di questo dibattito. Quando vuoi.
Thank you. So, first of all, I would like to say I'm very happy about all of this, about how all of this turned out. And the key areas which we focused on during this well-animated debate concern health, economy, and environment mostly. Because we clearly have two very different visions about meat. I would like to say that the opinions that the EU, the European Union, currently has, just testify the fact that they rule the global economy, and we're talking about a profit-oriented society and an economy which only aims to gain profit from things without actually caring about those involved. So then I think we're missing a point, because you talked about a choice in your speeches, but since we do not have to struggle for survival anymore, and in the light of the current events and the progressive damage, environmental and health damage damage that I also mentioned by relying on statistics, we should choose our future. We should choose our health, and the fact that legumes and meats have very similar values, and the fact that also vegan people and vegetarian people assume this vitamin by integrating it, but it's not something that a very big deficiency of movements, because they are in perfect health, testifies the fact that the amount of lags in terms of actual benefits of meat currently do not stand. And also, for what concerns the environmental impact and the economy, plant-based products would actually be a very valid alternative and something that we must do in order to protect the future generations and our planet. Because of course, the 2030 agenda has stated that we have to make some environmental progress in order to save what is left in our world. And by strengthening the current approach we have towards the meat industry, we would not do that. We would not come to any positive end. So, and I would also like to say something about the comparison you made between the wolf and human beings. Yes, the fact that is the wolf has to survive in some way. Well, we live in a very modern society that is nowadays able to choose which path to follow. And therefore, we need to choose the best one. And for what concerns the aspect about packaging things, I wanted to mention Fair Trade International, which uses packaging, some packaging made out of wood pulp. So it's very sustainable in some ways. So this is the kind of belief our house has, and the evidence we decided to provide today confirms what we think about, because we think that eating meat is a selfish aspect of our society, and it's a choice not to see the damage perpetrated towards environment, towards our health, and towards people in general. So the people who are part of it, or who are part of this industry, should try to widen their visions and actually look at the concrete circumstances in which we live, because if we choose not to, we're inevitably going to be the protagonists of a very deepened damage. So we do have an alternative by our side, and we just have to choose it concretely. Thank you for your attention. This was my speech.
Perfetto, 4 minuti esatti. Ringraziamo dunque la flyer della squadra Pro, scusate, non dire continua, e vorrei innanzitutto ringraziarvi per questo dibattito, che è stato veramente un ottimo dibattito, un dibattito combattutissimo, quindi chiederei a tutti di farci un applauso.